Hey. This panel is our animation panel. The title we gave it is Enhancing Mocap Data with Procedural Systems. Animation's obviously an incredibly important aspect of any game. It takes a lot of aesthetic skill as far as knowing human movement, but it also takes a lot of technical know-how and a good foundation to be able to pull off what we want. This following panel will give some insight on how the team works with mocap data to craft animations that actually become truly interactive with the player. So it gives a really good amount of insight, and it's fairly interesting. So let me introduce the panelists. We have Ivo Herzog, lead animation engineer. Jason Cole, lead cinematic animator from the German office. And Steve Bender is our global animator. I'll let them take it away.
Hello. Hey guys, how you doing tonight? All right. All right, so my name's Jason Cole. I'm the lead cinematic animator for Squadron 42, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about Look IK, or PCAP look transformation. The official technical term is PCAP look transformation, but today I'm just going to call it Look IK so I don't get confused or anything like that, because that's what we call it around the office. So what is Look IK? So Look IK is a system that we use to either have an AI or an NPC look at the player or a specific target. And so the first thing I'm going to show you guys is just straight PCAP with audio and facial data just running to show you what we're working with, okay? Just as a side note, all the stuff I'm showing you today is work in progress. So I'm going to show you Moro. Moro is still being worked on, and this is just a test level that I use to test out animations within the system, or within the engine. So here we go.
Cito's great. But a bit of a gossip. Don't tell him anything you don't want the whole crew to know. Rumour has it that's why his ex left. But he's probably better off. Told me she had a gambling problem.
All right. So this is just standard PCAP that we usually get, facial and audio. And there's not running any Look IK system right now. So what I did is I set up a camera to move around a bit, just to represent some player movement. And what I'm going to do is tell Moro here to look at the camera as if it's the player. Okay? So this is our standard Look IK system that we had before. It just shows the Look IK always on. Let me show that.
Cito's great. But a bit of a gossip. Don't tell him anything you don't want the whole crew to know. Rumour has it that's why his ex left. But he's probably better off. Told me she had a gambling problem.
All right, so now you can see that he is constantly looking at the camera, which is really good. I mean, we're getting some of the performance shining through on the face and on the head a little bit, but we are losing a lot of the subtleties, and this is one of the issues we wanted to sort out this year. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we did that. All right, so what we did is we broke up the Look IK into 3 different parts, right? The eyes, the head, and the body. And then what we did is we gave each one of those body parts a value from a 0 to 100. 0 being completely off, and 100 being completely on for the Look IK. And the first thing we did is we hand-keyed those values throughout the animation, which gave us pretty good results with the Look IK, but it's still, we weren't getting, enough of the subtleties within the acting, and it was extremely time-consuming. So the next thing we did is we created a control within Maya that we place wherever the character is acting towards. And then we would say, whenever this character or whenever this actor is looking at this control node, we would turn the Look IK 100% on, and then the further it looked away, the lower we would scale that down to 0, basically. So you can see here in this first picture, this is the control that we would use. And in this picture, he's looking directly at it, so 100% Look IK, and then the further he would look away from it, the less Look IK we would have. And this gave us much better results. A lot more of the acting was shining through and things like that. But it was still a longer process. So one of the other animators that was working on this with me, Owen Robertson, he approached me and asked if he can make a tool for us. He'd been working on his coding skills and think he could make an animation script for this. And I was like, yeah, sure, go for it, as long as it doesn't affect his current workload. And as long as he submitted his code through TechArt and got code reviewed, then it was totally fine, because we just didn't want to break anything within the pipeline already. And he made this LookIK toolkit, which is great. I'm not going to go into too much depth about this, but this basically took that process that we were having to do manually and really just automated it and made things much faster. The nice thing that he added that was an extra feature is that he was able to take the LookIK curves for the eyes and the head and then put them on 2 separate layers within Maya, and then we were able to either completely dampen those or exaggerate the LookIK on those systems within Maya. Then we bake it down and then do a little bit of animation polish on it. So now I'm going to show you the results that we were getting after this system. So this is running LookIK with the LookIK toolkit and a little bit of animation polish on this. Let me just make sure I give you guys some sound here.
Sitow's great, but a bit of a gossip. Don't tell him anything you don't want the whole crew to know. Rumour has it that's why his ex left. But he's probably better off. Told me she had a gambling problem.
So now you can see we're getting a lot more of the subtleties within the acting. You can see him looking back at Sitow, looking left and right before he actually talks to you, and some of the little head nods. It's a bit hard to see from the distance for this camera, so I'm going to show you guys a compare and contrast and zoom in a little bit on the head. All right, so the left is LookIK, the original system, always on. And then the right is LookIK with a little bit of polish and the animation toolkit, or the LookIK toolkit. And I'll let this run a few times, but you can really see the differences pulling through now. So you can see he's looking right then left, and he's constantly looking back towards Sitow. And we're getting a lot of smaller things in here, like head nods and little head turns. You can see it there as well. So I'll show this one more time, and then the next thing I'm going to show you guys is edge cases, basically how flexible the system is while it's running real time. Yeah. All right, so upper left, upper right, bottom left, bottom right. This is the exact same animation. But you can see I'm basically pushing the LookIK system as much as I can without breaking it or deactivating it. And you can see it kind of slipping here in the eyes a bit. And also when he walks away at the end of this on the bottom left, you can see the head pulling a little much. And so those would be the next things that we would start to figure out on the system to really tighten it up. But overall, it's been pretty good progress for the last 8 months, and we're pretty happy with it. So that's it for LookIK, and thank you for coming, and thank you for your support. Get my water out.
So hey, I'm Ivo Herzeg, and this part of the talk is all about teaching a character how to walk on stairs and over uneven terrain and over terrain that's filled with obstacles. And first I would like to show you a video with all the problems we try to solve. So this is the space station Damien, and it's rendered with the physical proxies on top. So that's a debug mode. Everything in gray is a physical surface. And one thing is very obvious here. Every surface you can walk on is a perfectly flat plane. Even the stairs are perfectly flat. So on top of the render geometry, we have only a simple slope plane. And all the animation assets we have in the build, they're all made for moving around on flat ground. If you use them on a stair or on a slope, then you get this floating and sliding up and down all the time. And it doesn't look too cool. And this is another issue. When a character is standing on a stair, it's even more obvious. You can see one leg is clipping through the geometry or into the ground, while the other is floating in the air. And here's another issue I see all the time. When a character gets close to an edge, then one of his legs starts to hover above the ground. And that's because we use the center of the character to find the distance to the ground. And the concept that both legs can be on different surfaces, so that's not implemented yet. So all these things are not looking nice, but they are not a dramatic problem. They are more like, how to say, a render issue. They have no impact on the gameplay. But the next one, I think, that's a real problem. And there's a good reason why we don't have physicalized stairs in the game yet. In the past, every part of the character was physicalized, even his legs. And if he has only his flat ground animations and nothing else, then he can't make a step over obstacles. That means every box that's in front of his feet and higher than 20 centimeters is a locomotion blocker. And this gets even worse in first person. So when you are strafing or moving backwards and aiming, you can't always look at the ground. So this is like a glass wall to you. It's not immediately obvious what's blocking your movements. And of course, it's also a problem for level design. You cannot tell a level designer that everything needs to be flat under your feet. I mean, that can't be the solution. So this video was showing only a few issues we have with stairs and random obstacles, but this list can be really endless. And one way to solve this is to tell animators to make more animation assets, but I think that won't always help, because this is one of those problems you can't fix with animation data alone. There are way too many unpredictable situations, and we just can't consider all of them. The only thing we can do is try to find a procedural solution. And the first issue, the one with the slopes, is not that hard to get right. And we already have a system for that in the Lumberyard SDK. It's called ground alignment. And when I put a character on a slope and enable ground alignment, then the motions look like this. And you can see the difference immediately. Both legs are now aligned with the ground. So this system takes a flat ground animation and transforms it on the fly into an uneven ground animation. And it's taking only the slope angle of the ground as a reference. And the implementation for this is pretty simple. Every frame, we cast a ray under each foot, and then we check if the intersection point with the ground is higher or lower than the current animation position. And then we move the hips slightly up or down and adjust the legs with IK. So with this system, we can put a character on a slope, and he can stand or walk or run in any direction, and the feet always have solid contact with the ground. And once you have the first version of this running, then you need to test every single asset in your database. Really, every asset can be a new problem, and then you need to find some heuristics to make them look right. And here's one example. As long as the character is only standing or walking upright, we only need to lower the hips a bit and adjust the legs with IK so that the legs can reach the ground. But if we have a crouch pose, like in this case, then we need to do the opposite. Then we move the hips up and stretch the legs down. And another important thing that you need to get right are the joint angles. When you are using IK, it's very easy to mess up the joints for the knees. So for example, if your IK target is very far away, you can get something that we call hyperextension. It means the upper leg and the lower leg snaps into an almost straight line, and that completely breaks the animation flow. And yeah, sometimes the legs can just bend in the opposite direction, and that looks painful, I guess. And another joint that created a lot of headache is the ankle joint, and that's the joint that rotates the foot. And it can't rotate more than 30 degrees in certain directions. So when a character is standing on a slope, it's not always possible to align the entire foot plane with the ground. You just can't do it without breaking the joint limits. And then he needs to stand with one leg or with both legs on his toes. And this happens here a lot when he's walking or strafing in different directions. So when you're moving backwards and downhill, the only practical way to do that is to walk on the ball points of the toes. And this is not coming from the original animation data. This is all part of the IK system. So ground alignment is for quite a while in the Lumberyard SDK or the CryEngine SDK. I think I've written the first version in 2006. The only problem is it only works with slopes, and it doesn't look so great with stairs and with random obstacles. But that's exactly the feature we need. On space stations, we would like to have stairs with horizontal treads. On the planets, there will be lots of natural ground debris, like small stones, big rocks, trunks, and whatever level designers like to put in the environment. So the real challenge is to figure out how a character can deal with every obstacle we place in the environment. And this is a simple test level I made with a lot of stuff in it. And when a character walks through this environment, and there's an obstacle in front of it, then you can see that sometimes he puts his feet directly on that object, and then he lifts his entire body over it. And sometimes he just steps over it. Now, to get something like this to work, the character needs a pretty good understanding of the environment around him. And he also needs to look into the future to react to whatever is in front of him. And when we see people walking in real life, especially when they walk over uneven terrain, they always look at the ground in front of them to find a safe position for the next footstep. And our in-game character somehow needs to do something similar. He needs to analyze his environment somehow to figure out what's around him. Now, because we know the speed of the character and his movement direction, we know exactly where the next footstep will land. If the next footstep ends up inside of an object or a couple of centimeters above the ground, then we use IK to modify the trajectory of the legs. And of course, this modification needs to happen ahead of time so that we have enough time to place the feet properly on the next surface. So, and then finally, we have here an example on a staircase. And once you have all this working with the random obstacles, it's not such a big deal to make it work on a stair with horizontal treads. There's just one detail here that's not always right, and it's maybe hard to see. So when people walk up and down stairs, they always try to hit the horizontal part of a step with the entire foot. But that's not always the case here. You can see that sometimes he touches only the edge of a tread with one of his feet. And yeah, this looks, how to say, it's not a big issue, it just looks like a misstep. If this happens to real people, then you expect them to stumble, lose balance, and maybe fall over. But in this case, how to say, nothing happens. And the reason why we have this problem is, so in this implementation, I'm doing only vertical leg adjustments. And then it depends only on the leg position on the original animation. That's why the result is a bit random. What we get here, it works most of the time, but it's not very consistent. So in one of the next iteration, I need to consider horizontal adjustments as well. And then we have an example with a character running over obstacles, and you can see that he's actually trying to do a procedural jump over obstacles. So when we have running or sprinting, then we need to scan the environment 1 or 2 meters ahead to make sure we can react to whatever is in front of the character. So if we find an obstacle, we just compute a new trajectory, one that looks like the arc of a jump. And this works with any speed and any movement direction. And the process we are using here is actually pretty similar to what a real body does when people move in real life, at least from a visual point of view. And this system is a bit like an AI system, but an AI system only for the legs. Okay, thank you. So I mentioned before that this is like an AI system. And now I want to go more into the details how we are doing this analyzing of the environment, because the character needs to understand what's around him. So for us humans, it's pretty obvious. We use our eyes to look around, and when we walk, we look at the ground in front of us. And we do that more than we think. It's an unconscious process. And now maybe you expect that we implemented something like neural networks or computer vision or something even more crazy. But that's not the case. These things need to run fast, so it has to be very simple. And I think this picture explains pretty well what we are actually doing. You need to imagine the in-game character like a blind man. A blind man who is constantly touching the environment with his walking stick to figure out what's around him. If you can't use your eyes, then using your sense of touch is just another way to perceive the environment. It's maybe not as efficient as using the eyes, but it's a lot easier to implement. And our implementation is only a small variation of this analogy. The only problem is, so the only difference is, instead of the walking stick, we use simple rays to test the environment, or to scan the environment, or to touch the environment. But to get the information you need to shoot a lot of rays into the ground. And you can start with 50 rays, that's already enough, but if you want to have an absolutely clear picture of the environment, you need a lot more rays. And we have a function for that, it's called ray world intersection. We used it in the past for ground alignment. Ground alignment needs only 2 rays. It's a very simple system because it has no prediction. And when we tested this in a scene with 30 eye characters, the frame rate dropped immediately from 50 to 5 and everything stopped working, and we spent almost all the time for this ray intersection test. And the reason why things run so slow is the binary trees we have to organize the entire world are meanwhile so deep and so complex that we waste too much time just parsing these trees. So ray world intersection was just not fast enough. And if you need something that is 20 times faster or 30 times faster, you can't just look at the existing code and hope you can make it somehow multiple times faster. Maybe you're lucky, usually that doesn't work. Sometimes it's better to rethink the whole problem and then start from scratch with a completely new approach. And that's what we did. And the problem we have here is quite unique. We need a lot of rays, but all these rays are close together. They're actually all in a very small area around the player. Now, instead of sending the same 50 rays to the same binary trees over and over, we pass the binary trees only once. And then we collect all the physical proxies that are in this small area around the player. And it's a bit better I show you with a video how this works. So under the character, you can see this gray quadratic field. That's the local area I'm talking about. And this is basically a physical microcosmos in the local space of the character. So this is all a debug mode here. And you can see that every render geometry has a simple approximation. Most of them are using simple geometric primitives like spheres, boxes, capsules, cylinders. And even the rectangles are just a bunch of spheres and capsules linked together. And often only a few of these proxies are actually using triangles. The reason is we try to avoid triangle meshes. They're a bit harder to process. So once you have all these physical proxies in the local space of the character, then we can do an even more aggressive culling on the animation side to find all the possible candidates for an intersection with the legs. And one thing is very important here, that's the size of this local area. The bigger it is, the more physical proxies are inside, and then things get slower. So the CPU time goes up. It actually grows exponentially. But this here is not the real size. I just made it 3 times bigger to show you how the things are working under the hood. So the real size is this. And you can see it's dynamic. It's super small when the character is standing idle, and it gets bigger when he starts to walk or run. It grows in the movement direction. And the reason why it grows is this local area is a bounding volume. We have a bounding volume around the rays, the current rays and the future rays. That's why it grows in the movement direction, because of the prediction. We shoot a rays into the future. And In a normal level, I mean not in this one is hopelessly full with stuff. In a normal level, we usually end up with not more than 2 or 3 proxies inside of this area around the player. And if you need to deal only with a couple of proxies, it's no problem to scan them with 50, 100, or even more arrays. So this works. So that's why we call it ray scanning, by the way. And in all our test cases, ray scanning was at least 20 times faster than ray world intersection. We had a few scenes where it was running 50 times faster, but that depends a lot on the setup and the type of proxies. But I would say a speed up between 20 times faster and 50 times faster is a good number. And once the performance problem with the raycasting was solved, it was time to test this system on a planet or on one of the moons. And the terrain of a planet, that's basically a lot of high field patches projected on a sphere, on a giant sphere. And the high field, that's always a connection of planes with a different slope angle. That's why I didn't expect any issues, because slopes are easy. What can go wrong with slopes? But the first test looked more like this. So you can see what happens. Sometimes the character floats into the air, and sometimes he sinks into the ground. And sometimes he sinks really deep into the ground. Okay, what's going on here? To render the terrain, we use a feature we call GPU tessellation or hardware tessellation. And that's a graphics card feature. So it takes existing geometry and subdivides it multiple times based on the vertex normals. And that's how we get these nice and smooth curved surfaces on the terrain. But physics is not aware of that. The physics proxies are still using the resolution of the untessellated terrain. And the physics system was never designed to deal with tessellation. That's why collision detection goes wrong and things end up like this here. The character is in the middle of the ground. And every single object that gets in contact with the terrain has the same problem. Now, if you run into such an issue, you have 2 options. You turn off tessellation and problem fixed, or you do the same for the physics proxies. You tessellate them as well. So 2 options. I guess you know what we did. We tessellated the terrain. And this needs to happen at runtime, every frame. And that wasn't an easy decision. It made the physics guys a bit nervous, because this GPU tessellation is just brute force processing power. A graphics card is designed to do that, but a CPU is not. But the good news is you don't need to tessellate everything around you, the entire terrain. You only need to focus on this little small local area I showed you before. It's much smaller than this one. I just made it bigger to show you the size of the patches and the triangles. All you need is 1 or 2 square meters around the player. So it's not that much. The other good news is it's very easy to work with high field patches. Okay, it's very easy to work with high field patches because they are ordered meshes, and every access is a direct access into a 2D array. So I can pick all the polygons I need for tessellation and ray scanning directly. And because the tessellation formula is very simple, this system runs even faster on tessellated terrain than in all my simple test levels you've seen before. And that's a bit unexpected. So after all this extra work with tessellation, we can finally put our first step on a new moon without sinking into the ground. And the surface of a terrain, of a moon or a planet, that's always a mix between between high fields and artist-generated content. So the rocks you see here, the outposts on stationary distance, okay, the vegetation that you see every once in a while, that's all artist-generated. And you can walk on almost all the surfaces, and the system must be able to deal with all of them. And in all this example here, we are using only the flat ground animations of the player that are already in the build since 2.6. We didn't make any new assets. So there's no single asset for walking up and down slope or stepping over things or for stairs and stuff like this. So when you see that stuff, it's always a procedural modification. And the word procedural means that we have a piece of code, and this piece of code either generates a new motion from scratch, or, like in this case, it takes an existing motion and modifies it in the way how we need it. So in other words, a programmer needs to figure out how people move in a specific situation, and then he writes a couple of code lines to reproduce the visual pattern of that motion. And all these procedural methods have in common that a computer follows the steps and algorithm to produce the result. And of course, they all suffer from the same problem. They work only for specific situations or specific motions. That means, in practice, so whenever you need a new behavior or a modification of an existing behavior, or maybe the animation director just wants to see something totally different, then a programmer needs to sit down and write new code. That's how it works. And this new code is always a combination of different IK solutions. And because it's a kinematic method, it can't be physically correct. And when you work with IK, then you can do things that are completely crazy. So maybe you remember the example with the boxes at the beginning. So this works pretty well as long as the boxes are not higher than half a meter. But we can do more than that. We could go to 1 meter, but then you get poses that look like Jean-Claude Van Damme. Or I mean, IK, that's something that comes from the robot industry. So that's the origin. And if you use that to manipulate human motions, then there's a risk that things start to look robotic, or you completely break the underlying motion. And then everyone in the animation team just wants to kill you. So the real challenge here is not only to predict the correct position for the next footstep, but mainly to make sure we maintain the balance and the consistency of the original motions, and that the joint limits are plausible when he's doing things like this, and of course that we keep the style of the original animation. And because Star Citizen is still a first-person game, one that is using a unified rig, the system is also active in first person. So whenever you look down at your legs or you see your shadow on the ground, that you can actually see how he is stepping up and down stairs and stepping over things. And all these things here, that's an early stage. It's an experimental system, and usually takes a lot of trial and error to get the best out of it. So I guess it will keep us busy for a while. And that is, the end of my part, the end of my presentation. Thanks for coming.
So I just wanted to say, what was that? I just wanted to say a few words here about what you guys have seen today. What Jason and Ivo have shown is just a small example of the technical challenges that we're dealing with on the animation side here. In a typical game, you'll be used to the areas that you're playing in built by level designers, built by level artists, and people like that. And each section of that game has gone through a rigorous testing. The animators have been able to run through it. The QA guys have been able to run through it. Everybody knows exactly what is going to happen. But in Star Citizen, it's really not that simple. I mean, as Ivo is showing here, I've never seen this planet before. And you have situations where it's possible, and what you'll see throughout the day today, where you could be on a mountain, on a planet that potentially nobody else has been on before, or I've never been to. No QA guy has seen it, up at some corner of this world, and you get into a gunfight for your life. And in those situations, the animation system needs to hold up. As I've been talking with you guys over the past couple days and past couple months, people have told me about You know, they're looking forward to, one gentleman mentioned logistics. And guys are talking about mining and landing on planets and exploring and stuff like that. Jason showed on the story stuff how the player can move around, and that character needs to follow you. It needs to stay believable. You need to be in that world with those characters, and the systems all need to hook together. So as we are building this, and for our community and for this, for Star Citizen, Ivo made a great statement. He said, taking the first steps on a new moon. That's a huge deal for us. We are not making animation for a game. We're making animation for a universe. So thank you guys for your support, and thank you for coming.
That was good. Thanks, guys. That was really cool. We don't have time with this panel for a Q&A session. Other panels we may. However, the good news is it's the start of the con this year. These guys are going to be here on the show floor. If you guys have questions for them, corner them. Ivo can talk forever about the low-level tech he does. Everybody knows that Steve can talk a good amount, and Jason is pretty smart as well. So. Thank you so much. The next panel, we're going to reset for just a minute. The next panel is going to be technology with a focus on graphics, talking about how we get a frame to where it is, and also some future plans. So we'll be back in just a few minutes.